Hey everybody, Chris here. If you've been listening to these episodes celebrating Wolfgang, then you already know that the climbing at Mount Arapiles, including Punks in the Gym, Wolfgang's famous first 14A, is at risk of being closed without input from climbers or the nearby town of Nattymuck. There's a link in the show notes for a great video on the issue, as well as a change.org petition that you can sign. Thanks. You know what I did recently? I decided that I like my Rab Ascender light hoodie so much that I bought two more. Different colors, of course, but I just want to wear the thing all the time. Now I can. And Rab are generously supporting this entire season of Written in Stone. They're dedicated climbers themselves, and they channel this expertise and passion into their designs. Nothing fancy or over-engineered, just honest, hardworking gear you'd rather repair than replace. And someday, I'll need all three repaired, so I appreciate that. Here's another thing. Rab has agreed to give away a few of these hoodies, which we'll be doing soon inside of our Patreon, the Secret Stoners Club. You can join for free at the link in your show notes. And this season is also sponsored by Tension Climbing, where you can use the code WRITTEN15 for 15% off of select items, and by Power Company Climbing, where you can use the code STONE for 20% off of most training plans, products, and books. As I was doing research about Wolfgang, I would regularly come across candid photos taken inside the house that he shared with Kurt Albert. And of course, I read every story about Wolfgang that I could find. And in those photos and those stories, I often came across an American name, Jesse Guthrie. So I had to try to find him and get him on the show. He was one of the people on the leading edge of sport climbing when it was first coming into existence. He established the first 513s in Alabama and one of the first 514s in the country with Tour de Jour at Yellow Bluff. And Jesse is now living in the Czech Republic with his wife and children, where he teaches English, writes books, plays music, and yes, still climbs. In this episode, we get into both Wolfgang and Kurt Albert, what it was like traveling with them, how the ethics were evolving, Jesse's time as a rodeo cowboy, and a bunch of hilarious stories. In the show notes, you'll find links to Jesse's website where you can find his books, music, and more. Let's get into it. I've seen a bunch of photos of you from the 80s climbing in the southeastern U.S. Is that where you're from originally?
I was born in Alabama. Didn't live there very much. My dad worked for NASA. We lived in Florida. Then we moved to D.C. And when I was 16, I graduated high school and hitchhiked to the valley.
Oh, wow.
And I never went home after that.
Wow. What year was that you first went to the valley?
I think it was 77.
Okay, so this is like Bridwell, Stone Masters, kind of ruling the roost.
Right.
What was that time like?
Well, I didn't spend too much time in the valley because I was there with a friend out of LA someplace. We met, and we were there just a short time. We did the north buttress on Middle Cathedral and came back down, and someone had broken into the car and stole all of our stuff. So I had no sleeping bag, and the only thing I had was my pants and my climbing gear. So I got really pissed off, and I said, okay, I'm out of here. And I just immediately hitchhiked back to Colorado. And so I went to Colorado and went, to Boulder Mountaineer in Boulder when it was on the hill. And I didn't know anything. So I asked them where the climbing was, and they sent me to El Dorado. Nice. And so I went to El Dorado, and I didn't have anything because I stole my sleeping bag. But I ended up going to Target and buying an electric blanket, and so I went to Eldo and I was sleeping on the picnic benches because they had the electric plugs there, so I could plug in my blanket and sleep on the benches. And so I spent most of my time then in Colorado. I went back to Yosemite a year later, but again, I didn't stay very long. It sort of just wasn't my scene. Seemed like it was just a jungle there,
Sure. It definitely seems like it was a really like insulated scene of like you're a stone master or you're an outsider.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Talk to me about El Dorado in that time, though. El Dorado was really ramping up as well.
Yeah, it was really for me, from the East Coast. I get to those big sandstone walls, and it was quite exciting.
Yeah.
And I just met this guy climbing there, and he was bumming around. He had a nice old Willys Jeep. So I ended up staying with him for a couple of weeks, just driving all over. And we did a lot of routes like Super Slab and I don't know, one of those roof routes, and I just was it was enthralled by the possibilities. It was just amazing, And I was young, and when you're young, and you don't care, So
Yeah.
my partners were always like, they took me up to. Here's a funny story, because George Bransick, who used to be the owner of Rock and Ice, well, he was a friend of this guy I was climbing with, and we wanted to do Crack of Fear up in Estes, but George was the only one that had those big tube chalks. So George goes with us, and they send me off to lead the thing, and I'm just, quite shit myself right at the top because it was so scary. It was so scary. Run out, overhanging, off with. It was like, oh my God. But it was quite, looking down, see George laying down there on the ground naked, sunbathing, and I didn't say anything because these two girls were walking up to go climbing. So that was quite a surprise for them.
Yeah, I bet.
We got a good laugh out of that. But yeah, so, at that time, I spent quite a bit, the whole summer, just sort of living on my electric blanket and eating tuna fish. And ended up going back because I was living in around outside DC, and so I ended up going back there, and I climbed a lot with the DC climbers. I think I have to say I'm probably one of the luckiest climbers because I always got to climb with the best climbers in the world, and I climbed with Steve Wunsch in Eldo. And I went back and I went up to the Gunks, and I was living in a tent in the Gunks, and Steve was there, and John Bragg, and all of those, Kevin Bine, all of those guys, Russ Clune. Russ and I did coax together, when we were little kids,
Russ is a good friend of mine. He was just on the podcast. So.
Yeah, I saw that on there. Yeah, but Russ is awesome, and we had such a exciting and fun time,
Yeah, and
that's one of our great memories was coax, But I always got to climb with the best climbers. I was living there in a tent and climbing every day with Steve Wunsch, trying to free all of the aid routes.
Wow.
So I was watching what these guys are doing, just blowing my mind. So I was really lucky, but I grew up around a bunch of DC climbers. And that's how I ended up with my sort of connection to Germany.
Yeah, when did you first go to Germany, and why did you end up going there?
Well, my friend John Brimmer, who's a local climber there in DC, and he has some relations in Germany, and it was always funny because I was kind of on the hippie side of the climbing team around Carter Rock, and he was sort of on the other side, But he liked me, and he called me, Jesse, I'm going to Germany. You want to go climb with me? And I was in Alabama at the time, trying to make some money for the next climbing trip. And I'm like, oh yeah, man, so boom. And again, another one of these lucky sort of things. John had a good friend in Munich, and he happened to be the Fee-Ray distributor for Germany at that, Boreal, when it was Fee-Ray,
Yep.
And we actually slept in his garage, and he took us up to the Frankenjura, and that's where we met Wolfgang and Kurt, because they were sponsored by this guy because they were Fee-Ray climber. Well, Wolfgang was, not Kurt.
Right.
And so, just a quick look back in the past, I used to be a rodeo cowboy.
Oh, really?
So for 5 years, I was a professional rodeo cowboy. Then I rode broncs and bulls and roping, and I did all of it. And it was really cool. But so the first thing John does, he tells Wolfgang and Kurt, hey, this is my friend Jesse. He's a rodeo cowboy. And those guys, they were like, what? Because they're so in, sort of, they were really fascinated by the whole Western scene. Everybody in Germany, they wanted cowboy boots. So,
Did Wolfgang ever get his cowboy boots? Did he ever wear cowboy boots?
I don't ever remember seeing him in them. No, I know Jerry does, because Jerry bought a pair for me when he was here. He was actually here like last year or so.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, it was sort of funny because those guys took to me right away. And we climbed a little bit with them in the Frankenjura, and then we had our trip planned to go to Verdun. So we took off and drove to Verdun. And the next day, Wolfgang and Kurt were there. Then I thought, oh, wow. So because I woke up in the morning because the water was pissing rain and it was coming through my tent and I was wet. So I walked into town at like 6 a.m, freezing, soaking wet. And there was Wolfgang standing in front of the bakery. Same thing,
of course.
Freezing, soaking wet, waiting for a coffee, And so I was like, oh, wow, So, and that was quite an experience, that trip in 1984. Because
is that the same trip that's mentioned in the Tillman Hep book when Wolfgang lowers you over the side onto a route and you called up for aiders?
Yeah. Because, see, when I went, I was still climbing in the red and white painter's pants and red Swami belt.
Right.
And I had EBs, so we were all the East Coast. Well, we wanted to be like those California boys. So we all wore white painter's pants and red Swami belts, But, so, and Wolfgang and Kurt were sitting at the top, and they're like, oh, Jesse, go ahead and have a try, My first ever time in Verdun, first climb, and I tie in, they lower me down, and it's on Caramel Moo, which is 7B+, which is incredibly hard for 1984, with EBs and the Swami belt. And I end up, because it's overhanging, so they lower me down, but they didn't give me quick draws. So they just let me down. I'm hanging out in the middle of the air about, about 3 meters away from the wall. Oh, hell. And being brought up, like climbing with a Swami, I always knew to have the extra sling. So I flip upside down, I put the sling on my legs and then flip back up and turn into a harness. But otherwise you die within 12 minutes, So, and then I get it. I'm start swinging back and forth. I'm 200 meters up in the air, just swinging around. Vultures are flying below me. My first climb ever in Verdun, first time ever. And I'm just shitting myself going, oh my God, I'm going to die. And I finally get in and grab the chains to the belay and pull in, and I'm holding on to that, trying to rest. And then I start climbing up, and I get about, 2-3 meters up, and it's hard little pockets and limestone I've not even seen before. I'm like, oh my God, whoosh. And I go flying off out to the fly. And Kurtz had walked around and came on the other side on top and was watching me. And he just laughs his ass off. He's like, And then they yelled, Kurt yells down to me and drops the other rope and yells, Jumar, so they dropped them to me, and then I Jumared back out, and I come over the top just like huffing and puffing and sweating and just like, oh my God. And they're both sitting there on their butts laughing their ass off, So,
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, and I was like, you guys, thanks for the fun.
At that time, were Wolfgang and Kurt like known? Like, did you know who they were when you first met them?
No, I didn't know any of the European climbers. Because in 1984, I don't even know that there wasn't very much big news in the States about what's going on in Europe.
Yeah.
I think the only kind of news that was coming through was from England, with Jerry.
Sure.
Or Ron Fawcett,
Yep.
But there was never, I think it really started after after Punks in the Gym, I think.
That's sort of the feeling I'm getting in this research, is that the media didn't really pick it up.
Yeah.
How how often did you end up being in Germany? I've seen a bunch of photos of you like sitting around in their apartment in the kitchen. How often were you there?
Well, yeah. So at 84, I ran out of money and ended up going back to America. And then my friend John actually stayed. He got a job in Garmisch, which is the mountains at the south of Munich, working for the American Army base. They were hiring civilians to like work in the restaurants and stuff for the American vacation, the service. And so he sent me a postcard. Jesse, come back, man. There, you get a job here. And so there you go. I finished, saving up a few more dollars and flew right straight back. And John hooked me up with a job. And so I stayed in 85. Then I was living in Garmisch. And then I had made contact with Wolfgang and Kurt. And so I would always go up. It's like a 3.5 hour drive from Garmisch to Wolfgang's house. So I'd go up on the weekends and climb with them. And also at that time, we were all living, or they were all living at Oberschulenbach in a house that it had like 3 stories and a basement. And Wolfgang Kurt and Inga at that time was living in the middle. And on the top was Norbert Santner and his
That's
wife.
what I thought. Yeah.
So, and Norbert, he had his own store in downtown Nuremberg. And so, and he was also running a guide school. And so he hooked me up and said, Jesse, come on, work for me. On the weekends, I'll send people through Garmisch. They'll pick you up. You take them to Arco and lead them up some climbs and they'll drop you off. And I thought, oh, yeah, cool, man. So, and that worked out really well. And I ended up, then I met a German girl there. And then we started climbing a lot with Wolfgang. And then we decided to come back to America in 86. And we stayed in America. At that time, I just, been climbing a lot with Wolfgang and learning what they were doing. And I started working on those routes in Alabama at that time. And after a while, we kind of got sick of Alabama and went back to Germany. And we left and moved in with Wolfgang. So we were living at Oberschulenbach with
cool.
Wolfgang and Kurt. Yeah.
Well, there's I have a bunch of questions about all of this period. First, can you sort of describe the scene on any given morning in that kitchen?
Yeah.
I've seen so many iconic photos. I just want to hear what it was like.
That's what it is. Basically, we always had people living in the basement, like Jerry and Ben, and a lot of guys from all over the world were just camping in the basement. So we come down in the morning, and first thing you do, Wolfgang, he drank, 10 pots of coffee a day. It was amazing, And so, first thing you do, you come down, you have a coffee, and you hang out at the table and see who gets up. And then you make the plan. Okay, where we're going today. And basically then either you go with different teams or they'd split off and do different things. Because also next door lived Norbert Bates and his wife, and Norbert's a really good climber, and they always had climbers at their house as well. So it was like it was quite a crazy place, but it was always fun. And that's where I met Jerry there the first time, and it's the same thing, Jerry's like, oh God, you're a rodeo cowboy, So him and Kurt, they were something else,
What was Wolfgang like as a person?
He was pretty. I liked Wolfgang a lot. He was one of my best friends because he was very calm. You didn't see him get pissed off very often, and if he did, it wasn't. He wouldn't go off. He wouldn't go off on you. He was really calm. He was very focused. He would never drink beer, only just a little wine every now and then, but really focused on his muscles and
Yeah,
and
I
his
mean, a German who
fingertips.
doesn't drink beer has to have some other kind of focus.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. But he was a lot of fun. He had like almost a British sense of humor, very dry. He would do
Mm,
things like uh, when we were living there, Wolfgang goes, "Oh God, I have to go shoot a bunch of pictures." And I was actually working for Norbert, at his store, doing little things around there. And he said, "Come on, I need you to go to Semai in
in
Italy,
France.
France, sorry, and Bukes, because we have to
Hmm.
take pictures." I'm like, "Oh, okay." But I have to pay my rent because we actually just moved up the street from them, and my wife and I in a little apartment. I said, "But I got to pay my rent." He goes, "I'll pay your rent. That's okay. Come on." I told my wife was there with Sean Miles,
Yep.
and because Norbert brought this big machine over for them so they could start making T-shirts, free climbing T-shirts with a picture of Wolfgang on it. So yeah, it was a funny community, But and so they were doing that, and Wolfgang and I went off to Semai and Bukes, and like all of the pictures in his first book, based on the Rose and the Vampire with blue jeans. You
Yep.
know, I'm at the bottom belaying on almost everything because
Got
it was
it.
so hot. Yeah, but
Yeah.
that was for pictures only. So
Well, the what you were saying about when he would get pissed off about something and he wouldn't really, outwardly display it. What I've sort of come to in all of this research is that he would vent that through his writing. That's the way it seemed. Like every time there's a moment where in Tillman Hep's book, Wolfgang is getting riled up, there's a corresponding article that he published
yeah,
about the sort of ethical transgressions that he didn't agree with or something like that. And I find that really fascinating that he was that measured in his approach.
yeah. I think he was. I think he was pretty self conscious about himself outward in the media.
Mm, mhm.
Because and I can completely understand. It's like when
Sure.
we go anywhere we'd go. It was always, everywhere we'd walk, people would be like, "Oh, there's Wolfgang, Wolfgang." Oh, it's like
Right, right.
it's like Brad Pitt walking up to the climbing
Mhm.
area. So
Yep.
even the girls were drooling. It's like, "Oh, Wolfgang,"
Yeah.
So I think he was always holding back a little bit. And but yeah, I mean, a lot of things like that. Yeah, he would tell me, it's like, and yeah, you'd see some article about, they're doing this and that, chipping holds and blah blah blah.
Was there ever discussion of like I think he's a great example, and this is sort of the basis of my story about him. I always try to reframe history and help us like learn from where we've been
Yeah,
and how that's going to inform our future. And something I think Wolfgang did a great job of is he held on to his ethics really tightly, but when it became clear that things were changing, he would let them go and he would change with the
yeah,
times. And we didn't get to see enough of that because he was taken away so early.
yeah.
But I'm curious if there was ever discussion about those ethics when you were out climbing, especially in France, because I know he had a
Oh,
little bit of a fraught relationship with the French
with all of the
early
French.
on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, especially GB. Yeah, but
Yeah.
but yeah, again, I think Wolfgang. At least my feeling was that it was like, yeah, he would see these things and then he would make his opinion about it quietly,
Mhm.
and sometimes not so quietly. But at the end, he would watch it and go, well, okay, it seems like that's where the trend is going, and
Right.
I think he was never one to force his opinions. He'd give you his opinion,
Yeah.
and if you didn't accept it, that was okay. And if you did something else, he wouldn't stop liking you. He would just say,
Mhm.
"Oh, okay, well, he's got a different way of doing it." And
Yeah.
so I think in that sense, yeah, he was, I think more than anything else, he was really focused on what he wanted and what he wanted out of climbing and how he wanted to do his routes.
I find it really interesting and fascinating because there are some articles he wrote where he's clearly upset at the way people are doing things.
Yeah.
But then just a couple of years later, it didn't take long. There's an interview with Beth Wald. I can't remember if it's in Mountain Magazine or if it's in an old climbing. It must be in an old climbing magazine.
Yeah.
And he says people should climb however they want to climb. I'm going to climb however I want to climb. You know,
Yeah.
The only thing we have to make sure we aren't doing is damaging the rock.
Yeah.
You know, manufacturing holds.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So he was very quick to sort of parse through these ethics and come to a really great stance.
Yeah, yeah, but I think also he wasn't he was not an aggressive guy.
Yeah.
So he didn't want to fight. He didn't want to have like the media, you know, gibberish jabber shit online, you know.
Yeah, totally. I want to go back to you coming back to the US and establishing things in Alabama. At that time in the mid to late 80s, what was it like in the southeastern US trying to apply those same tactics you had learned in Europe?
Yeah, no, well, you know, it was, for me, it was kind of easy because when I first started, like at Yellow Bluff was right south of Huntsville, and it was really unknown. And my photographer friend Royce Simmons found the place, and so we just started going there and checking it out and bolting routes. But basically, I was doing it like the way that I had sort of had the experience with Wolfgang and Kurt. Don't put a bolt in if you don't need to. And so there was little areas where you could put in some little sliders or chalks or something. And so all of the routes that would normally have 10 bolts on it had 3.
Right.
So a lot of the southern climbers who came, you know, those guys were mostly trad climbers. So I think they appreciated that the trad was still there, but it gave us a chance to push the levels, because like Yellow Bluff, man, there's just areas that are slightly overhanging, flat, smooth sandstone. Just, it's heaven.
Yeah.
But you couldn't get up it without a bolt, you know? So they were quite open to like, oh, no, wait a minute, this works. And I never, at that time, like with Wolfgang, I never top roped a climb. I rappelled down, I looked, I cleaned, I put a bolt in where I thought it should go and went to the bottom, and then boom. And then I started working it from the ground up. Once, you know, you put in the nut, clip, put in a nut, clip. And that was sort of the ethics at that time. But a little bit later on, I could see it starting to change there, because that was at the time when a lot of guys were going to Bukes.
Yep.
They were coming back with these ideas, and suddenly, you know, like when they start to drill a hole for a bolt, it slips a little bit, you know, and then suddenly there's a finger pocket, you know. So, it was, you know, it was all kind of going in that direction. You know, they were calling it the lab, you know. So,
I wanna like kind of not interrogate. I don't want to interrogate, but I want to understand better the ethics of that moment. I found it really interesting, just coming from a, you know, looking back lens. The way I think a lot of climbers now see it is that, like, as soon as red pointing was made a term and a style, that it just took over. But in reality, Wolfgang held on to the yo-yo style for quite some time. Even though Kurt had sort of originated this red point thing. Was Kurt also still yo-yoing? Were the two just kind of intertwined?
I think they never claimed a route until they actually did it properly. But they worked it, yo-yoed them, you know. but we all
Got it.
we all worked it that way, you know.
Right.
Just section. It's like going to the climbing gym now. You know, you have your little project you worked at, and every section on the climb became the project. So you finish this one and move up to the next one, and keep working and working and working, and until you could get all of the sections done, and then you have to put them together.
Yeah.
So that was really the whole point, you know, was because, you know, those boys in California, well, even in the gunks, we were doing it. You give it a try. You go up, we're trying to free the technical routes. You go up, you give it a try, you fall. Boom.
Yep.
You come back to the ground, you pull the rope.
Yep.
You know,
You may not be able to answer this, Jesse. I'm just curious because when I was writing this Wolfgang episode specifically about punks, I've climbed on punks and I can't imagine not hanging there and sorting out the moves because it's so body position dependent. But I'm also not Wolfgang.
yeah.
So I'm curious, do you know if he ever did sort of embrace hangdogging and when that might have happened, if he did?
Oh yeah, absolutely he did, you know, because the stuff he was doing, there's no, you know, nobody could come close to on-sighting what he was doing at that time. And the
Sure.
only way he could do that was to work those problems out.
Yeah.
I mean, like action direct, man, he worked on that for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, because it's such a hard move, you know. And the problem for Wolfgang, he was a big boy. So not like these skinny little guys who just float up if they fart, they just go to the top. You know? But
well, I wonder how much of that was also influenced by
Backer.
Flipper feats. Did you?
Yeah, now Flipper.
Like the hang-dogging part. Because Backer never really did embrace hang-dogging, I think.
He did in Germany.
Oh, did he?
Well, I mean, what did he do that one next to Waiting on the Train?
Chasing the train.
Chasing the train, yeah. Something like that. Because, you know, I think Backer was learning from Wolfgang. You know, because he's in a new world, you know. He's in the overhanging finger pockets of limestone. So it's not granite, it's not a crack. It's quite another world. So I think he learned a lot from Wolfgang. And Wolfgang had tremendous respect for Backer for what he had done in Yosemite, you know.
Yep.
But you know
that's actually a really key part of my story about Wolfgang is Backer does Chasing the Train and he does it yo-yo first, but then they're both trying to red point it at the same time, and Wolfgang does the first red point.
Yeah.
Backer still gets the credit for establishing the route, and Wolfgang still really admired the way Backer had done it. So I think that it seems like, reading the books and trying to read between the lines, that was a big influence on Wolfgang sort of hanging on to the yo-yo style for as long as he did.
Yeah, and I think he, you know, that just lasted right to the end, you know. And but again, I think Wolfgang, you know, he would take the best, like the best from Backer, and expand on it, and well, look what happened. He put up the hardest route in every country, you know. So, and it was because of those styles and how he would go and take each section. And because it's so funny, everybody goes, I got a campus board. And I go, oh, really? Wow, cool. You know, I was actually at campus when they made the board. And they're like, what? I go, yeah, campus is a gym, a workout gym in Nuremberg. And those guys built the board there. And that was the original campus board.
Right.
So and they came there with that style, and I was there like with Jerry and Kurt and Wolfgang at campus training, and you know, they were changing everything that I had ever thought about climbing. You know, it had become gymnastics,
right?
And not like the Camp 4 muscles, you know, doing that, you know. So they changed. Their whole thought of how they needed to develop had changed a lot. So, and those were things that helped me when I started, when I came back to Alabama to climb, you But yeah, it's a whole new world. So, but to be honest with you look at all of the kids today that 9-year-olds that climb at 8C, it's like Jesus, it's just
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I've joked multiple times on all of my podcasts that anytime I see a small child at the crag, I just assume they climb way harder than I do.
yes, yeah,
Immediately.
yeah. Excuse me, little boy, could you go clip the first one for me?
Exactly. Would you mind hanging my drawers for me?
Yeah, So, but see, there's a good example of if you look back to the time when Wolfgang was in the Frankenjura with Backer, and they were working, chasing the train. And look at that, the attitude, the mentality of everything they do to get up that, and what they figured out they had to do to get up it. And now you look at how that's developed into now. Now there's the climbing gyms where they go in. You see these kids and they're training like crazy. They have trainers.
Yeah.
And they're so strong.
Yeah.
And it all comes back basically from that mentality of how to adjust your body to fit the climb.
Yeah.
And that's what those guys were doing.
There's one thing I came across in Wolfgang's writing that I found really interesting and inspiring in a way. And it was him talking about the yo-yo versus hang dogging, kind of early in the days of, I think after his first trip to France or one of his early trips to France where hang dogging was the way and they weren't really accepting the yo-yo as a valid ascent.
Right.
He talked about the reason he was hanging on to the yo-yo is because it was harder, and like it was harder to work out the moves if when you fell you had to lower to the ground. And that was, in his mind, that was validated by Jerry doing the face, and he really admired the way Jerry did the face because he did it yo-yo style instead of hang dogging. And to go from like that mindset of I'm in this for the challenge. Like I want the personal challenge more than I just want to do this next hard thing.
Right.
To go from that and have that be the same person as who created Action or who sent Action Direct and gave that to us, I think is really kind of a beautiful thing and shows that your own personal challenge is really the biggest piece of this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's definitely what inspires you to keep pushing harder. Because in the end, you're not cheating, and that's what it really comes down to. Whatever
you consider cheating, whatever that is.
No,
for
exactly, yeah. And everybody has their different level of cheating, and so as long as you feel strong in yourself about, okay, yo-yo's okay because you don't have time to check it out. You don't have time. You fall, they have to right back down, but then people go, oh, nah, yeah. But it doesn't matter what anybody says. It's how you feel in your own self that, okay, this is a legitimate way for me because it's not taking away from the challenge of the climb, blah, blah, blah. And I'm comfortable there. So I think that was quite a lot of Wolfgang as well. He's like, okay, look, I think this is legitimate. I think it's fair because I'm not getting any advantages. I have to keep coming down every time. So, and I'm wasted, So for him, I think that's just the more motivation to get stronger so he can last longer, not to have to yo-yo. But Wolfgang was never a very good on-site climber.
Yeah, that's what I've read.
But he was, he could do 7C plus on site,
Yeah, sure.
But, at that time he was climbing 11 minus. So,
Right, exactly.
So that was like the warm up,
Well, I have another question about you that just popped into my head. I'm seeing this, these framed photos behind you. Is that you rodeoing?
Yeah, that's me.
I need to know, like, what is that timeline? Did you start climbing before rodeoing?
Yeah, I started climbing when I was 13.
What led you to rodeo then?
Oh, well, okay. So in 77, I think yes. No, 78, I went back to Yosemite the second time. And I didn't like it, pissed off, went back to Boulder. And I was hanging
Hmm.
out in Boulder, climbing with my friend, again, the same friend with the Willies, and waiting for my friend who I lived with. He's an orthopedic surgeon. He was kind of like my mentor. And I was living with him and his daughter. And he came to meet me in Colorado. So I was like hanging out. My friend Doug from Colorado, he was teaching at the university Spanish or something. And I was hanging out at his ranch in Niwot, which is just outside of Boulder. I was
Mm-hmm.
bored, and one of the friends of his was staying. We were living out like this little sheds in the back. And we had horses, a little ranch. I was really bored, so I climbed a tree and I fell out of the tree because I was waiting for him to get home. I wanted to go climbing, and I fell out of the tree, and his friend comes running out. It's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Man, I didn't know what happened. I just was on the ground." And I thought, "Oh
Wow.
man, I think I broke my shoulder or something. It hurt so bad." And so they took me to the hospital, and I told the doctor, "Man, they took X-rays and stuff." He came back, put a sling on. He goes, "No, I can't find anything wrong." I'm like, "Dude, man," I said, "When I just turn a little bit, it hurts so bad." He said, "Okay." Took another X-ray of my neck, and my neck was broke, and
Mm.
the two vertebrae had squished and pushed forward. And the doctor came running back in and grabbed me by my head and laid me down really carefully. He had tears in his eyes. He almost sent me home with a broken neck. You know, so I
Wow.
broke my neck, and that was in June. And my friend Bob got there like the next day. He's like, "Oh shit! Oh, I guess we're not going to climb." So I hung out for a little bit, and I went back to DC. And when I was there, I was hanging out with the ranch, and there was like cowboys and horses, and I was like, "This is kind of cool." I'm at the Wild West in Colorado. And so I
Mm-hmm.
really kind of got into it. And so my friend Bob told me about this. Ranch. It was like the rental horses near where we lived in DC. So he said, "Go out. There's a guy out there who rides rodeo." So I went out. I still had my neck brace on. So I go out.
Jesse.
I'm seeing him, and then like I talked to him a little bit, and then the next week I went to another doctor, a friend of his, and he took my neck brace off to have a look, and my head didn't fall off, and I was like, oh wait, I'm okay. He goes, "Well, not really, but you don't need your brace anymore." So the next weekend I went back to the ranch, and this guy said, "Hey, well, why don't you come along and you can see what the rodeo's like." And I had really long hair, and so,
Mm-hmm.
but he was really nice. So I went and watched the rodeo, and I thought, man, it's the cowboys, and it was so cool. And he said, "Okay, well, how about if I enter you in the bareback bronc riding next weekend?" And I said, "Hell yeah." He said, "But you got to get a haircut." I go, "No problem." So I
Uh,
cut all my hair off. I got cowboy hat, and I got all my cowboy stuff. And next weekend I was over in Maryland, someplace at a rodeo, first time ever. Sat on a bareback bronc, and he just said, "Nod your head and open the door and just hang on." And there you go. I went about 3 jumps out and went flying off the back end of the horse,
uh,
bam, down into the arena. But the arena is so soft, it's all
mm,
tilled up, and
yeah.
no pain, no problem. I jumped up. I want to do that again, and that was how it was. But it's the same, it's like adrenaline. You,
Yeah.
you get so easily hooked to it, and so that was it. So I stopped. I didn't really stop, but I took a break from climbing from 1978, and I stopped riding rodeo at 82. I actually rode in a rodeo in New Paltz.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I was sitting down at the rodeo arena right and looking up at the traps.
That- yeah. Well,
So
Jesse, that is not the answer I expected. I didn't expect I went from climbing to the rodeo by falling out of a tree,
yeah,
breaking my neck, and so I decided, let's go rodeo.
yeah, yeah. See,
That's the wildest roundabout story I can imagine. for getting into rodeo. I love it.
Well,
I want to do a couple of things here before we wrap up. Number one, do you have any stories about times with Wolfgang or Kurt or Jerry or at French Crags, or any stories you think are worth telling?
yeah, I would say, okay, a couple of funny things. When I went to Semai with Wolfgang, and
Yeah.
He had a Volkswagen GTI. It's like really fast, And I always wanted to drive it, And so we get down there, and we're coming back. He said, "Okay, let's go home." It's just me and him in the car, and so we drive through France, and we stop right at the Swiss border. And Wolfgang says, "Oh, okay, can you drive?" And I "Oh yeah, sure, no problem, man. Yeah, GTI, yeah, woo, boom." He says nothing to me at all, nothing. And man, I hit the gas, and we go through Switzerland at 220 kilometers an hour. And I did not know there was a speed limit of 130. And he did not tell me. We went flying all the way through Switzerland. It's like, whoa, and Wolfgang's like, I'm like, it's okay, man. As soon as we get to Germany, he goes, "Okay, that's good. I'll drive now."
Oh man.
Yeah. So, but he did the same thing to me in East Germany. We came from in '91. We went to visit Bernd Arnold and do a climbing competition. And a lot of the photos from the book, there's photo from me and Wolfgang on there as well. And it was the same thing. They had a speed limit of 130, and it was still East Germany. So it wasn't, even though the wall's down, it was still East Germany. And he said, "Jesse, you drive." So there we go, 200 through East Germany, because he doesn't care, because he's American. If they pull him over, they're not going to take his license away.
Right.
It's like, but it's same with Kurt and Jerry. They spent, but I lived in Netherlands. I went back to Colorado. I can't, in 1988. That's when I started Valde. So I was living in Netherlands, and Jeff Lowe was my neighbor. So I was climbing a lot with Jeff, and Kurt and Wolfgang and Jerry would all come over to my house. So, and then all the Germans started. So my house was kind of like the German consulate in Colorado. It was always full of Germans, and so they would come over and do some crazy stuff in America all the time. I think the craziest thing was when I was the first year in Verdun, and we were all sitting in the cafe, and it was around, I don't know, about 11 o'clock at night. And Wolfgang and Kurt and a couple other guys, they go, "Okay, well, we'll see you guys later." And I go, "What are you doing?" We're gonna go do Lunabong. And they're like, "What?" Lunabong's like this big, long off-width. And they tied 4 ropes together and lowered them down. And so at midnight, it was a full moon at midnight, and the 4 rope links in the midnight. That was just stuff those guys were doing, And Kurt was the biggest joker of all. He was so funny, You just couldn't sit in his kitchen. He was a fanatic about like Chinese finger puzzles and stuff, He would get
really?
He was like, "God, you could never figure it out." And it's like, "Oh my God, it's so easy." Once he showed you, But he was a genius. Funny. He was really a genius, but he was just the funniest guy. Him and Jerry made such a funny team, because Jerry's like a toothpick. And Kurt was like Conan the Barbarian.
Right. There's a great story in Jerry's book about the first time he met Kurt, that he walked into the house, and Kurt just immediately was like, "Your face, look at your face. It's so funny."
Yeah.
So I could see those two being that way together.
Oh yeah.
I think you spoke at Kurt's memorial. Did you at Wolfgang's memorial as well?
No.
Okay.
I did speak there because I was so heartbroken. That was the first time in my life that I've had such a close friend die. And
Yeah.
I had a really hard time with that. For me, both of them were like the heart of the community, because they were so giving and so helpful, and anything that you'd ask them, they were happy to do. Neither of those guys ever had one grain of arrogance in them. They were the most friendly and sort of down to earth people you would ever meet. And that in itself is something that I think should be passed on. That's not is that true sense of our community as climbers. Because back then we were small, we were a community. I don't know. I wrote a book called Life of a Nomad Climber, and you can find it. But it really is about that. It's about, we were all nomads, and we were traveling to different areas and always running into each other. And those guys were, no matter where you were, they were helpful. They would never say no. And I miss that sort of grace and style of what climbing was at that time. I'm not quite sure that at this point that climbing has changed so much that it's a whole new world.
Yeah.
And yes, I miss them both very much, because I live just 3 hours from the Frankenjura, and so and I have so many memories from them there. And it's same. I still go see Bernd Arnold. He's only an hour and a half from me, and so and Bernd and Kurt were really strong friends, and so we have that tie together as well. So Bernd and I climbed just last year together. He's 74 now, 74, 75, and he's still just walking up. It's amazing. So. But and so that's that would, if I had to wrap that, I would say, I miss them.
Yeah. Well, Jesse, thank you for reliving some of those times and telling me some of these stories. I kept coming across your name and your photo in conjunction with Wolfgang and Kurt, and I just thought it would be a travesty if I didn't at least reach out and see if you would be willing to chat a little.
No, thank you so much. I was really quite happy and surprised, Chris, that you contacted me, because it's funny. But just quickly, I work for Edelrid here in Europe. I'm the Edelrid agent for Germany, Czech, and Slovakia, and I travel to gyms all the time. And I'm always asking the people in Germany, hey, do you remember, you know a guy, Wolfgang Güllich? And I swear 80% don't know who he was.
Yeah.
And I find that the really the sorriest part about it, because he's such the foundation of what climbing is today, pushing the limits.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I'm doing this podcast. I'm trying to tell these stories and connect a lot of these dots and draw through lines between the great climbers and the great ascents and what we're doing now, and trying to connect it all in a way that maybe hasn't been done before. So
that's a great thing. It would be nice if some of these younger kids could look back in the history a little bit, and realize, who those people were.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you doing this.
Oh no, it's with all my heart.
1, 2.
Written in Stone is produced by me, Chris Hampton, with help from Riley Rush for Plugtone Audio, a group of the best, most impactful podcasts in the outdoor industry. Don't forget to sign up for our free Patreon so that you can be entered to win one of the Rab hoodies we'll be giving away soon. And remember, this show is 100% rooted in the facts, but like Todd Skinner always said, Never let the truth get in the way of a good story. If you love what you're hearing, give us those 5 stars and a glowing review. Join the Secret Stoners Club and tell everyone you know at the Crag, on the interwebs, and yes, I also want you to tell those punks in the gym, and together we can tell the stories of climbing's most important ascents, 1 decade at a time. Secret Stoners. It's been a roller coaster of a week around here. First off, I'm feeling more caught up. Still not as caught up as I'd like to be, but I'm feeling more caught up. That's the high note. The low note is on Monday, I went to the Knowles Library to do some research for the next story episode coming next week, and the shelves containing the climbing, rock and ice, mountain magazines, summit, all of the climbing magazines were gone. Gone. The shelves were cleaned out. So I didn't panic. I sent some emails. I texted some friends who work at Knowles. I got a photo back from my friend Cody of a bunch of magazines stacked on the floor of an unused wing at Knowles. And I got an email from my guy Jeremy that I've been working with that he saved the climbing and rock and ice magazines from a potential dumpster, which is unbelievable to me. And I'm trying to get the mountain magazines saved as well. I'll know more soon. So I may have to house those at my house now. I don't really know. I'll figure all that out next week. But anyway, I'm glad they're still there, and huge thanks to Jeremy from Knowles for making that happen. One way or the other, we're going to keep this thing rolling. Also, before I do anything else, just a quick note for you all. I got an email from my folks at RAB, and I wanted to share this cool thing that they're doing with you. RAB is providing scholarships for trips run by Ladies Weekend Out. Over the past 3 years, they've been partnering with Ladies Weekend Out, supplying high-quality demo gear to help facilitate transformative outdoor experiences. And this year, they're sponsoring both full and partial scholarships to those Ladies Weekend Out events, making their educational programs more accessible than ever and helping to empower women in the outdoors. So I will have a link to that in the show notes. You should definitely go apply. The deadline to apply is March 15th. So go apply now. And I hope one of you women in here win one of those scholarships. I'll also be posting it on the regular show as well, but I wanted to post it in here ahead of time. All right. Another thing I thought of the other day, I got a text from, actually it's been an interesting week for texts. I got a text from our new to Kent and Gibe Tribu. They are in, let me see where they are right now. Look at my text messages. They are in Margalef. They sent me a photo. Looks very nice there. And I'm hoping to see those two next summer in 10 Sleep again. So maybe I'll get another episode with that crew. I also got text messages from Hans Florine and from Russ Clune. And it's the one from Russ Clune that I wanted to talk about because it reminded me of something in the Wolfgang episode, in the story episode, that I hadn't pointed out. I meant to point it out to you all, but I was so exhausted when I did my Secret Stoners chat that I totally forgot about it. This is one of those little Easter eggs. You know, I'm very into the Easter eggs and hip hop and And I talked about those moments where you just feel like a genius. You did a thing, you feel like a genius, and no one's ever going to notice it. In the beginning of the Wolfgang episode, in the kitchen scene in the beginning, I say that Kurt Albert is standing in the corner telling jokes. And as I say that, you can hear someone laughing. That laugh is Russ Clune from my episode with Russ. So just a little Easter egg in there that I was able to tell Russ about. I hope it brought a smile to his face when he heard it, and I hope it brings a smile to yours, especially if you go back and listen to it. It's one of those moments. I felt like a genius, and it just felt like the right thing to do. This conversation with Jesse Guthrie was so much fun. What an interesting character, and I'm glad that I was able to track him down. I didn't really know anything about him other than what I'd read in the Wolfgang book, just these quick little stories and seeing photos of him. So I didn't know too much about him, but it's been interesting going back and seeing that he was on the leading edge of sport climbing at the time, and that he established some of the first 513s in Alabama and one of the first 514s in the U.S. It was shortly after Scott Franklin did To Bolt or Not to Be that Jesse did Tour de Jour at Yellow Bluff. So he would have been one of the first few Americans to climb 514. It just goes to show that these names can get lost to history, especially when we are always focused on the first person to do it, when in fact, like we've said many times on this show, there are a whole bunch of people pushing each other and leading each other in that direction. All right, I've got a couple of bonus episodes coming for you all this week. I've split up the bonus episodes in a different way than I originally had planned. I'll tell you all about that in the first one. And so there will be more coming down the road. And I also was able to get that interview scheduled that I really wanted. And it will be coming Wednesday on the regular feed. And I'll be talking with the first and the only Australian woman to climb punks in the gym. All right. I'll see you then.